So, hello Internet, this is IPython and Jupyter dev meeting for February 9th, 2016. Many people today, and I think for once, John is first. John, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so this previous week I worked a lot on IPyWidgets enhancements, including adding some unit tests for the new standalone stuff. I've been having problems where I would go and do something and that would break all the examples for how to do standalone integration with Jupyter.js widgets outside of the notebook. And so it was a perfect candidate for some unit tests. The other big thing I did last week was webpacking the whole notebook. So that PRA link there actually webpacks all the JavaScript in the notebook. And I've designed it to be fully backwards compatible, so it should work with all the old require paths. It will throw a little warning in the console, but it will even work with the old require.js paths if those files use npm packages, for example. And that's because I proxy all the require.js old paths through a bundle, through a single special file that then routes to a Webpack built file. So that's the kind of thing that definitely won't get merged overnight. We need to test it and maybe just live on the branch and see if all of our extensions work and whatnot. But I think it's a good way forward to especially help shrink the gap between the notebook and Jupyter Lab. We can start taking pieces from different npm packages and actually using them in our current notebook to bring them together. This week, Wednesday to Friday, I will be at Cal Poly conducting interviews with Carol for our software development interns. And today I'll just be doing some maintenance, enhancement, and user support for the notebook and the widgets. Min, if you're online, I think you're next.
Wait, John, do you think it would be okay to merge your Webpack changes to the notebook and make it live on master so that we can test it easier? Like, is it ready for us to really try to live on it?
Yeah, well, it really needs. So I would say, if it gets some more review, then yes. Like I think there's some like rough review, and then we can maybe live on master with it. But maybe I would delegate that to Matthias. Make that call. Matthias, what do you think? Or how do you want to handle that? Do you still want to have a meeting so we can talk about what this is? Because I'm not even sure if everybody wants this yet.
So there are still a lot of issues open for 4.2, and if we merge that, it might become really hard to backport things. So if we wait a few weeks just to push 4.2 out, then I'm fine because we are early on 5.0 development to merge that and iterate on master. And the really nice things I find is your wash thing for Webpack is pretty fast when you do change to files, which is nice. You like from the time it's recompiled to switch to your browser, it's done. So it's nice for interactive iteration on the JavaScript file. So it's I think it's pretty safe in 1 or 2 weeks to merge that into master and iterate if we push 4.2 off.
Yeah, and
Cool.
I think since the changes are for the existing files are mostly in the imports at the top of the file, and it doesn't really change how things work on the inside. I don't think we need to be too worried about the conflicts either for backporting things for 4.2, especially since Go ahead.
Oh, it's just the jQuery imports I had to change.
Yeah, so I wouldn't expect the conflicts to be too bad, and probably handling a conflict in a small backport would be less annoying than John rebasing this PR. So we can go either way, but yeah, I think we can review this and get in. I think it seems like a good idea. Oh yeah, and I'm up.
Oh, I think actually it's your turn, man.
Yeah. I don't have too many interesting things to say. I've been chasing down various small things on various repos, some 4.2 things and some NV convert things. Just going through the short-term milestone issues and fixing and adding docs and things. And Carol's been helping me with a lot of the doc work on Notebook and Jupyter Hub. There's a new enhancement proposal for localization that was just opened that it would be nice if people can chime in on. I think that sounds like a good idea, and we can hopefully get more support for that one than the last time we tried it. And then there's also the pull request for adding attachments to markdown cells, basically letting you add line bundles to markdown cells for attaching images and stuff inside the notebook. Was something that we started in the fall, but then we switched gears to getting Notebook 4.1 out. So now I can get back to reviewing and merging that stuff. Yeah, that's me.
I think I'm next. Okay. So I started doing some documentation fixes based on some of the stuff I learned after giving my kernel talk on Saturday. So Carol, you'll get a couple of those in a sec. Been furiously working assembling speakers gifts for Jupyter Day. Started tinkering a little bit with Interact and thinking about cell workflows and other stuff. And finally, I am working on preparing an outline for another opensource.com article. It's that same website where I published that other piece on Jupyter. This one's for their open science portion of the editorial calendar. So I'm going to write a pretty long feature on the notebook and how it blends with things like Matplotlib and pandas and that ecosystem. So if you want to review the outline or chime in, let me know. It's not due for another month. But yeah, that's pretty much it for me.
Carol, I think you're next. Are you on the call?
Dropped off, so I think we can skip her and go to Chris.
Okay, Chris, you want to make this? Oh.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Chris is not feeling well, so he asked me to talk about his stuff, which actually sort of makes sense because he and I have been working pretty closely with the command palette over the past week. What he did was switch the way the palette works altogether. The palette is actually a really, it's a simplified dumb widget now, and there's a separate data model class that goes along with it that feeds the palette, that does the searching for it. He switched the search from a library we were using that was a fuzzy search library to a simpler sum of squares, which is super, super fast. It's a slightly different behavior, but one that most people won't notice, in that fuzzy search allowed for off by one sort of letters, but the sum of squares requires every letter you type to actually exist in order in the search string. But if you use any other command palettes, like say in Sublime Text or elsewhere, you'll see that that's actually the behavior that's there, and it feels really intuitive and it feels super fast. And let's see. Right, so that I guess sort of ties into what I've been doing. I created a bunch of examples that have a lot of data in them just so we could play around with the interactions and tweaked the way the keyboard interaction works and the way the mouse interaction works. because this all came out of what we should be doing with menus. And for the time being, we think the palette is a rich enough thing and easily accessible enough that it might not be the case that we want menus everywhere. It might be the case that everything fits in a palette. And since everything is both quickly searchable and organized by categories, and you can drill down into categories, it may well be the case that that's sufficient. So that's our sort of model right now that we want to try out in the wild. And so we did a demo of the palette yesterday with Jason and the Phosphor team, and now I am integrating that into the Jupyter.js plugins repo and bringing the styles from the old palette in line with the new one because a lot of the markup has changed. And trying to add some sample commands and figure out a good way of externalizing shortcuts, because at some point in the near future, we're going to want those to be configurable, so they shouldn't be interspersed throughout the code. Or if they are interspersed, they should at least be isolated into separate config files of some sort, shortcuts, JSON, something like that. So yeah, that's, I guess, the composite Chris plus Darian report. If anyone has any questions, go ahead. Otherwise, Matthias is next.
Okay.
I have a
Thank
quick
you for,
question. I have a quick question for Darian. Was there a reason why you guys use sum of squares instead of just sum of absolute values? Just curious. Was there precedence for the sum of squares?
I think sum of squares is, I think that's something that's used in other places. I don't think it came out of nowhere, but you'll have to ask Chris where he actually came up with it. I'm pretty sure, like, when you look at its behavior, it looks nearly identical to Sublime Text. So I'm pretty sure there's a reason for it there. I think it might have been the case that you really want these things to separate quickly by distance. And sum of absolute values, because you have both category matches and you have caption matches, might not have created that distance as quickly, but I'm not 100% sure. But it's a cheap enough operation that that is the least of our concerns. In fact, what seems to be the slowest thing is we now have this behavior where we highlight the substring that matched, so you can see which of your characters matched. And because of that, we can't use normal DOM injection. We have to use inner HTML because we're actually sending in a marked up string. So that ends up being a slow thing. And actually, one of the things I didn't mention, Chris pushed today a node recycling optimization, which instead of redrawing the whole thing, he tries to find which nodes exist that can be repopulated to minimize the reflow. So all of the changes that weren't structural and weren't behavioral were actually basically optimizations. But yeah, you could ask him about some squares in particular. I think it's one of the commonly used string match algorithms. Cool, Matthias.
Yeah, thank you very much. So not much code-wise for me this week. A lot of paperwork and administrative stuff, helping Fernando's for hiring. I will be giving a talk at Plus this Thursday in downtown San Francisco. It might be recorded and public. I don't know yet. If it is, I will post a link later. We will have soon a few interns on IPython and Jupyter from UC Berkeley. So if you see issues tagged as URAP on GitHub, it's because I'm asking them to work on a few things. They're still, for some of them, pretty beginners in Python, so they will ask often probably other code developers to help them on a few things. If you can take over when I'm busy, I would appreciate. And next meeting, if you're searching it on GitHub, might not be recorded. You will see if it appears on YouTube next week for people from the internet that are watching us. of course, I cannot say why. Just to warn you. And the last thing, I'm also working a bit on pigments to have a better handling of ANSI escape sequences in terminal. So I have fighting with Mercurial because I don't spend enough time with Mercurial and I don't remember ever the commands, which is a pain. And that's it for me for this week. The next person is Nicolas. Do you want to?
Yep.
Go ahead.
Okay. Fantastic. Yeah, I've been very heads down on a push to get the themes into NB Present. It's going pretty well. Getting there to where you can set individual themes for a slide or themes for a particular or for the whole deck. Kind of took some thinking about the data model, but I should have something up that people can start hitting on soon. I've got a few users from people hitting me up on Gitter and stuff like that, but it should be pretty interesting pretty soon. Sure wish I'd done it in Phosphor. I'm trying to do some work around keeping up with NPM and stuff like that. I ran into some issues with Babel, and apparently fixing NPM is about the only way to fix that if you want to keep up with that. So that's kind of exciting, trying to figure out what stable NPM actually means. I mean, LTS, I suppose. I've been definitely thinking a lot about the dev meeting stuff. I think there's a bigger topic than just NBViewer around static notebook hosting. We've started talking about that with an issue, but how can we make notebooks embeddable into whatever? So this would include Sphinx, Pelican, or Nicola, or one of those things. GitHub pages, all those things. We want to make it like a very default form of publishing stuff. How can we leverage read the docs, all those things. I'm very interested in the internationalization stuff and also in search. I think they're very related. And so then on the experimental front, this is kind of a fun thing that lets you go in and hack on the different settings of a particular bokeh plot. We're looking at widgetizing this, which is kind of weird to have the widget backbone talking to the bokeh backbone, but it should work. But that's about it. Next person is Stephen.
Yep. Continuing to iterate with Jason on the Jupyter Lab. We broke out the document manager into its own repo. It kind of made more sense to have that be isolated. Improvements to the file browser, the behaviors there, the styling. Working right now on, we had sort of a temporary placeholder for notebook execution. I'm working on making that more robust and just trying to stand up this demo. Jason?
Yeah, I've been iterating with Steve as well and talking with the Continuum guys working on Foster and the Jupyter Lab stuff. Also working a lot more on the application state, reading a lot about how different people do it with web applications or with Visual Studio Code or some other editors, etc. Wrote up some thoughts on the link that's on Hackpad. Curious to get your anybody's thoughts that wants to chime in about how to think about application state and how to preserve it and how to share it, etc. with the Jupyter Lab.
I think I'm next. Not a lot to report, but I've done a little bit more on the Jupyter overview paper, having to really sort of force myself to do something other than writing code. And our poster proposal got accepted for LPub, which is an electronic publishing conference, which will be in Germany in the summer. So there'll be another thing to write for that.
Okay, I will go next. Do you hear me? Yeah. Well, essentially, last week I was fighting a lot with some Win issues, packaging some of the Continuum and IPython extension, and I'm still working on that. Also, there is a lot of issues and some PRs on the RISE repo, so I have to attend that. I am and actually working on some of them. And I'm very excited and looking probably reviewing some of the work that Nick has done in EddyPresent around Teams and some other user interface enhancements on EddyPresent. And probably I will try to review some of the notebook PR that I think are essential to have 4.2 as soon as possible ready. That's all for me.
Okay, I think it's me next. I spent the last couple of weeks finishing off the shortcut manager and a few other things for Phosphide. Last week was largely going around the code base, trying to add useful unit tests where we didn't have any. I think that's kind of coming to an end now. I think we've got pretty good either coverage or code about to be merged. So I'm kind of getting back onto the Jupyter Lab stuff with Steve and Darian again. That's it for me.
Yeah, I've been working on third-party widget libraries to update them to work after the small split, which is the split of the JavaScript and the Python in IPyWidgets. And I have another PR in the works which is coming back on the widget persistence to simplify some things that were a bit complicated at the moment. So yeah, that's it for me. I think I was the last, actually.
Okay, so is there someone else who hasn't spoken yet? Or someone who wants to say something else? Going once, going twice. Okay, so nobody wants to speak. Nick, say goodbye. So thank you, Internet, for following us. See you in 2 weeks and see you on GitHub, mailing list, and so on and so forth. Maybe some blog posts and everything. Have a nice week and enjoy.
Wait,
bye.
Did you say 2 weeks? Are we not having a meeting next week?
We're having a meeting, but it might not be recorded. It will probably not be recorded.
Right.